Hello, everybody, to Getting APIs to Work. Today, we say hello to Mehdi Medjaoui. Hey, Mehdi, how are you doing?
Hello, Rick. I'm doing really well, and thank you for having me in your show, Getting APIs to Work.
Thanks for joining, Mehdi. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Today, we want to talk about terms of service, and you've looked a little bit into this, terms of service for APIs, of course, and you've looked a little bit into this, and let's just talk a little bit about what that means, why it matters, and why it's important to maybe start looking at these a little bit closer. So give us a little intro, please, about what API terms of service are. Maybe.
Yeah, so we know APIs as the interface contract between two software systems, to interact with each other. But when, let's say, the software belongs to different companies, institutions, systems, at some point you may want to declare, let's say, the legal contract that applies to this interaction. And the goal of API of services, API's term of services, is to declare that legal contract, what are the things you're allowed to do, that you're allowed to request, and that we will allow you to do, and the one we will not allow you to do. It contains revocations, policies, breaking change policies, service level agreement, pricing, and so many other rules that are important to know. And this is why you should care about terms of services before they take care about you.
That's I think a very good intro for all of this, because in the end, I always think of it that the technical definition tells me just how it should behave ideally. I can always do this and I will always get back that. And then the terms of service are much more kind of the real world thing, right? It's like, how fast does it do it? How much do I have to pay? What happens if it doesn't do it? And all these kind of things. And recently I think you have been working on this for a little while, and recently you published a blog post. We can link it down below there. We had a couple stories in there. Maybe you can just like tell us one story where it became clear that looking at the terms of service does make a difference. If you're not doing it, maybe you put yourself into a bad position.
Let's say the main example that we can use is the Twitter API. There are many others. There are hundreds of other cases where API term of services enforcement has been really hard. But this one has been the most, let's say, public one. In 2012, Twitter has hundred thousands of clients of its API. Everybody is allowed to resyndicate data into different clients to be able to create a new user experience delivering tweets, which is a great network, and I invite you to follow us on Twitter, Eric and I. It's a great network. But the thing is, at some point, Twitter decided that they were more a media more than an infrastructure for messaging. So they say, yeah, our business model is to be a media, so we want to be sure we can deliver ads to people on the network. So they said we will not allow syndication anymore of the tweets. It has to go through the main Twitter client. So they abruptly decided to stop and revoke all third-party clients. Not all exactly. They allowed some to still survive, but let's say the huge majority have been broken. And this is why, reading term of services is extremely key, because your whole integration and maybe your whole business, depending on this integration, can be completely broken because some clauses like we can revoke your access at any time for any reason without notice, which happens in many terms of services, can be breaking your application and your business. If Twitter is one of your API, that's great. But imagine you have 10, 20, 30, 50 different services that where all the term of services actually claim this kind of really dangerous clauses. You need to have like what I call the API integration supply chain management risk to manage. So that's why term of services are important, and they need to be more understandable and readable.
For this story that you were telling about Twitter, did have this sentence in their terms of service that they are free to revoke access at any time unilaterally?
Yeah, at the time, yes. At the time, I wanted to build the API rating agency, so I read like 300 term of services, and actually, it was in more than 95% of them.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the first clause. We can revoke your access at any time for any reason, mostly present in public and free APIs. When it comes to business, when it comes to payments, and there is some SLAs clause, there are some revocation clause, notifications that change a little bit the nature of the contract. But yeah, for publicly available and free APIs, yeah, you will see this clause most of the time. So be aware of that. And at least if you don't read them all, you should be able to read at least the most important clause that may affect your application or business.
And I think that is really the beauty of the thing that you have in mind, is to make these terms of service a little bit more understandable. So that at least like these things, right, like red flags, so to speak, are the ones that you're looking for them, you understand them. And at the very least, even if you want to use the API, you make sure that you have a plan in place that if that happens, you're not like scrambling for what should we do now, but instead you can just say, okay, we knew it could happen, so here's what we do. And I think, but I have a story myself that I want to tell very briefly, which also involves Twitter, right? So even if you have terms of service that don't say that, you still never can be sure. And the story that I would like to briefly tell is Smite. Do you remember that story, Mehdi? Right. So Smite was actually interesting because Smite was a paid service that had terms of service where you had to pay for it, and it was a service that did some kind of sentiment analysis, so that as a social media you could filter out like hateful and obscene content and so forth. And Twitter bought Smite because it's something that they used and that they found useful. And at some point they said, okay, let's just buy that. And then I think the very next day they just closed down the service for everybody else, even though they did have ongoing contracts with Smite. Right. And they were, like a lot of companies, I think, were struggling really hard because they never planned that this would be shut down, but they needed it, and then they had to figure out how to deal with that. So just briefly that story. So even if you do read the terms of service, bad things can still happen, but it's more unlikely. It's like any other contract, right? If you enter into a contract, it can always be broken, but at least you should knowingly enter into a contract where you understand what you're entering into, and not just blindly go for it and hope for the best. And I think
But
that's
but
the main
but
point here.
but in some term of services, actually there are compensations in written, and
Uh,
if compensation is written directly in the term of services, it applies and it's enforceable. So this is why there are sometimes public term of services, sometimes there are private term of services or enterprise term of services. But just to say, it will be the contract that define your API consumption relationship. So you should be aware of what's in there. But the problem is that it's a legal document with really boring. Developers sometimes don't even like to read the docs. So why they will read the API term of
it's like
services?
3 levels higher, yeah.
Yeah, it's really far away. But as I say, they if you don't care about them, they will take care about you and your apps. So yeah, and just an example, for some, but sometimes it's for good reasons that they allow you or not to do some behaviors. But for example, some banks does not allow you to cache the data for more than 24 hours. You are not able to cache real-time data more than 24 hours because there may be a big gap between the reality and the information you have in cache. But maybe as a developer you want to cache, so term of services can really enforce and
Mhm.
ask a lot of things directly. LinkedIn, for example, does not allow you to make a relationship that does not exist in LinkedIn happening in another app. Just an example. So you're not able to make links that not exist inside LinkedIn, or broke links that are in LinkedIn. So again, they really try to put you in specific corner that fits with what they consider a good use or fair use. But if it happens that you don't respect that, they may cut your access
Mhm.
with the ability they have to do because of what's written in the contract. So know that it will be the relationship that you are currently engaged with.
And I think just all the anecdotes that you now mentioned, right? I think those really highlight very well that it's a complex relationship. It's much more than just you consuming data and then doing whatever you want with it, right? You consume a service, and that service can restrict the things that you're allowed to do. And that's like you agree to these restrictions when you use the service. So be aware of that. And I think it's really important to point that out. I think it's something where we probably will have an ongoing stream of these stories for a while. And with all the predictions that we see, that we will see more and more relationships between companies through APIs. So there might even be an increase in these stories because there will be more dependencies within companies, and they might even become more complex because you get more and more business models. And therefore, I think your initiative. Tell us a little bit about your initiative to make those terms of services more understandable, and maybe even standardize them in some shape or form.
Yeah, and right before that, I just want to rely on just what you said. In classic supply chain, you have a buyer. That's the role is to manage all the suppliers and suppliers' contract availability and deliveries to be sure everything will happen and will be delivered on time for the production need. We will have this I let's say API buyer or API integration manager or dependency manager that will manage like what's are the relationship contract companies the availability of third party services and how they can come inside the IT system as the digital supply chain. So totally agree with you on this. So there's a new job coming like API buyer, API
And
procurement.
also, right? I mean, also part of the job description then for them would be probably to look at alternatives, right? And say we have this supplier, and this supplier is really important for us, but we don't know exactly how stable it is. So, what are the alternative suppliers, right? And monitor the market and see what kind of things at least we could switch in if we have to. So, yeah, I really like this idea. It's a really I think it's probably something that we will do see increasingly happening in the organizations when they realize their dependencies on APIs.
Yeah, from supply chain management, risk supply chain management to let's say API risk supply chain management. That's the goal.
Yeah.
So to explain a little bit the research we're doing, we had a case in the past where let's say legal stuff was really hard to understand by people, but was important to enforce. It's like, for example, the terms of copyright. You may be familiar with Creative Commons. Copyright rules are not easy for understand for everyone. But Creative Commons said, okay, we will try to reduce the degrees of understanding of copyright into four simple rules. Do I need to attribute the work to where I got it? Am I allowed to modify it or not? Am I allowed to sell modified work or sell the work including that or not? Am I allowed to or obliged to share it with the same license that I received, or can I change the license? Really, for simple. Of course, copyright has more nuances, but they just reduce it to the main use cases for
Yeah.
non-legal people to understand what they can do. And actually, that really spread a new wave of sharing economy where authors and creators can be more compensated because we people keep, let's say, there's the license associated with the asset. The goal is to do the same thing with API term of services. Giving at some point we will see there is a survey we're conducting, but the idea is really to have some icons, some illustration that gives you a hint about what's inside the term of services. Is it free or free tier, or is it pay as you go, or is it do they allow you to do any reuse of the data, or no, it's limited reuse to
Mm-hmm.
certain business models, or no reuse at all? Do you need to mention the original API where you got the data? And what's the SLA? There
Yeah.
is an
So
SLA
powered
enforcement.
by whatever,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
powered by this company. Either is an SLA enforced or not, or either compensation in the SLA, in the service level agreement or not. And again, and you
Mm-hmm.
can imagine like revocation policy. If there is one notice notification or not. And just last example, that can be the breaking change policy. Do they can break change without notice? Do they give 3 months, six
Mm-hmm.
months, 9 months, or do they claim their we don't break APIs policy, like write once, run forever, and they guarantee that they will never break an API as long as the user is using it. So this delivering this into readable and understandable icon and iconography.
All of this is fascinating, Mehdi, and I really want to talk about this in more detail. Really looking into, you mentioned, and I love Creative Commons, right? They've done a super nice job, like you said, like boiling down things into these four things. I'm really curious to see how many things you will have. Probably a few more than four, but let's see. Let's see. No spoiler here. But one question I would like to ask you is that, like, the famous, I always forget the number, the XKCD thingy, right? That says, oh, there are 20 standards. What an outrage! There should be one, and this is how we get to have 21 standards. So, how do you respond to that?
So currently, there is no standard document or for describing API term of services. That would be just a first one. So that's the first answer I would say. But let's say that uh, actually Creative Commons reduced the degree of liberty of copyright. Copyright is really can be really complex with many flavors. It's reduced to four rules, four simple rules to democratize understanding. This is what we want to do with term of services. There's so many degrees possible. We want to reduce to, let's say, minimum viable rules so everybody can understand. And so like this, the industry can go more on conventions. I will not, I we will see what people want. My two cent is that it will not go into a standard, but mostly conventions. If you want your term of services to be read or understood, it's good to go with these conventions that most of the people will agree on. If you want to
Mm-hmm.
stay the lawyer style, yeah, put your 20 pages term of services that nobody will read, but that you will enforce when it's good for you and not for your customer.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, it's a good point. And I think, even if you're not able, basically like Creative Commons, to accurately reflect every copyright rule with your system, but at least you can give some indications and say, okay, here with this you're clear. With this, no, you really have to look into the terms of service because you're not right. This is kind of murky, and you have to make sure that you know what you're doing. And that alone, I think, could already help, right? To alert people of certain things that might be more complicated, or that where they can just assume, okay, this is written in a complicated language, but basically it allows me maybe to do these and these things. And that alone, I think, would be very helpful.
In legal design, as for in design, this is what I've learned, but less is more. Less complex contract are actually more use, more agility in making relationship and partnership. So yeah, definitely reducing the scope of what needs to be understood completely changed the deal. And I've learned something about what we call Walt Disney contract. It was 600 pages, 800 pages about where every possible case were written. Like, if this happens, you owe us this. If this happens, you owe this. Like, it was thousands of ifs, you know. But that was really complex. So now we reduce the scope for of understanding, so more people can be embraced and on board on, let's say, the sharing economy.
And I think, that's another really interesting point here, because I think, in Walt Disney case, right, there's only one company that has Mickey Mouse. So they are a monopoly, right? So if you want to license Mickey Mouse, there you go. You have to do whatever they do, right? But if you are in competition with others and you want to stand out a little bit, maybe also making it easy for others to understand what your terms of service are could be another differentiating factor, right? Where instead of forcing your potential customers to read through, probably not 600, but read, read through a big document, right? You could just say, look, like, we make it easy for you, not just technically speaking, but also legally speaking, and that might just be something that potential customers appreciate.
Yeah, our belief is that simple, understandable, and readable term of services are part of developer experience. The fact, the time to first hello world, the ability to just say, yes, I will try your API and integrate it.
Mm-hmm.
If you remove that part, that pain for developers to maybe send it to legal or product manager, say, yeah, can I use this, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, it's reduced the cost to answer the question, can I use this API, right? And so we believe in part of developer experience. Yeah, it will be key.
So you will make your API supply chain manager more happy if you pick those APIs, and
Yeah,
they might
at
favor
least
them because of that.
you will remove one services to think about risk. And yeah, that's we hope, and we will see. Actually, the survey will be conducted until the 10th of March, so we invite you to fill it before the end so we can include your feedback as producer, consumer, provider, in the survey, in the study. We already have a few, like almost 200 answers, but we want to reach 500. So this is really our goal, to be relevant. So
Okay.
and yes, so you can fill it. It's like 5 minute, 20 questions. Just you just cross, click, and it's easy. And yeah, to make API term of services more transparent for safer and saner digital infrastructure trust.
That is a really good pitch. And I think it really is important for everybody, both for API consumers and for API producers. Everybody has to think about how can we use APIs with less friction overall. And I think the work that you're doing there is an important piece of that puzzle. So I would like to encourage everybody to please go to Mehdi. We'll put the link somewhere here. We'll put it in the video description here. And yeah, let's get to those 500. So, and I really hope you will be back once you have all the results, right? And you have produced like a little overview of what people were saying, and then we can look into the next steps of your project.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Mehdi. Okay, you go.
No. Just to say, yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share about it. And yes, and after this survey, the goal will be to propose a framework, a draft about what people would have said. And yes, the goal is to be community driven, to be community-wise accepted. So.
Okay. So thanks a lot for sharing all these insights, Mehdi. It was fascinating to me. And then, like we discussed, right, it's probably something that we will only become more important with APIs just becoming more and more kind of ubiquitous for how everybody's using them and depending on them. So I hope that a lot of people will fill out the survey, and I'm really looking forward to hear more about the results. And we'll do that probably in a couple of months.
Let's do that. Let's do part 2 after the results.
Part 2, exactly. Yeah, I like that. Thanks a lot for being here, Mehdi. Thanks for taking the time. And with that, we're done. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Please go and fill out the survey. And if you liked this video and found it interesting, please give it a thumbs up and maybe consider subscribing to the channel. With that, we're done. Thanks, everybody. And until next time, bye-bye.